The old alien sat in the metal chair, his forearms folded across his chest. His skin was gray and covered with scars from old battles. Dr. Minji Park looked at him from across the small table. She had her recording device ready and a stack of papers beside her. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Veltar," she said in a calm voice. "I know talking about the war is not easy." Veltar's yellow eyes looked at her for a long moment. His face showed no emotion. "You humans always want to know about the war. You think you understand what happened? That's why I'm here," Minji said. "To understand both sides of the story. You fought against us for 7 years. You saw things that our history books don't talk about." The alien made a sound that might have been a laugh, but it was not happy. "Your history books? They tell you that you won because you were brave and smart. They don't tell you the real reason we left your space." Minji leaned forward. "What was the real reason?" Veltar was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. They were large and had sharp claws. "I will tell you, but you will not like what you hear. Nobody likes the truth about war." "I'm ready," she said. "I was young when the war started," Veltar began. "I was a soldier in the hegemony fleet. We had better ships, better weapons, better technology. Your people had just started traveling between the stars. We thought it would be easy to take your worlds." He stopped and looked out the small window. Space was dark and full of stars. "My first battle was at New Sol. It was a farming world. The people there grew food and raised animals. We thought they would surrender when they saw our ships. We were wrong." Veltar's voice got quieter. "Commander Do-Yun Lee was in charge of the humans there. He had maybe 300 soldiers and 2,000 farmers. We had 5,000 trained warriors and war machines." "What happened?" Minji asked. "We landed our forces and expected to take the main city in one day. Lee and his people ran into the countryside. We thought they were cowards. We were wrong about that too." The alien stood up and walked to the window. His reflection looked tired and old. "The first night they hit our supply trucks, not with bombs or weapons. They used farm machines, tractors with metal spikes, harvesters that had been changed into war machines. They came out of the fields like ghosts." Veltar turned back to face her, but that was not the worst part. "The worst part was what they did to our minds, and what do you mean? They left things for us to find. Pictures drawn by their children. Little humans who should have been afraid of us. But the drawings showed us being defeated. Some drawings showed us being welcomed as friends. Others showed us running away. The children were not afraid." Minji wrote notes as he talked. "How did that affect your soldiers? Fear is something all warriors understand. But what do you do when your enemy has no fear? When their children draw pictures of you and smile while they do it?" Veltar sat down again. His old body moved slowly. "We found one drawing that I still remember. A little human girl had drawn herself giving food to one of our soldiers. At the bottom she wrote, 'For the scary alien who must be hungry too.' My soldiers were confused. 'How do you fight people who think you might be hungry?' The fighting went on for 3 months. Every day was the same. We would attack. The humans would run. Then at night they would come back. They used things we never thought could be weapons. Like what? They mixed farm chemicals to make poison gas. They used water pipes to flood our camps. They trained their farm animals to attack our vehicles. One day a cow exploded and destroyed one of our tanks." Veltar's eyes looked far away, remembering. But the strangest thing was how they talked to each other. We listened to their radio messages. They never sounded afraid or angry. They sounded determined, like they had decided something and would not change their minds. Commander Lee would give orders like he was asking people to help with farm work. "Jinwoo, please take your team and remove those metal visitors from the north field." That was how he told his people to attack our position. "Remove the metal visitors?" Minji asked. "That was what they called us. Not enemies, not invaders. Visitors who had stayed too long, like we were guests who had become rude." Veltar stood up again and began to walk around the small room. "After 2 months, my commander wanted to use heavy weapons. Destroy the whole area. But the hegemony leaders said no. They wanted the farmland undamaged. So we had to keep fighting the humans with small battles. The humans started doing things that made no sense. They would attack us, then leave medical supplies for our wounded. They would destroy our food, then leave packages of their own food with notes saying, 'Sorry, you're hungry.' My soldiers began to get sick. Not from weapons or poison, sick in their minds. They could not understand enemies who acted like this. We train to fight people who hate us. We don't know how to fight people who feel sorry for us." One night I found 3 of my best soldiers sitting in their shelter, crying. I asked them what was wrong. They showed me a box that the humans had left. Inside were small cakes and a note that said, "Happy birthday to whichever alien has a birthday today. From the humans who wish you could go home." Veltar stopped walking and looked directly at Minji. That was when I knew we were fighting something we did not understand. Your people were not just defending their world. They were trying to make us understand that we could be friends instead of enemies. But the fighting continued, Minji said. Yes, for 1 more month. Then something happened that changed everything. We captured Commander Lee. I thought the human resistance would fall apart without their leader. Instead, every human on that world came to our base. Old people, young people, children. They came without weapons. They just stood outside our walls and waited. What were they waiting for? For us to decide who we wanted to be. They could have attacked us. They could have run away. Instead, they showed us that they trusted us to do the right thing. Veltar sat down heavily. My commander ordered us to leave New Seoul the next day. We had won the battle but lost something else. We had learned that some enemies are more dangerous when they treat you like a friend. The room was quiet. Minji looked at her notes and then at the old alien warrior. That was just your first battle with humans, she said. Yes, Veltar replied, and it was the easiest one. Veltar looked at his hands again. They were shaking slightly. Dr. Minji Park noticed but did not say anything. She waited for him to continue his story. After New Seoul, the Hegemony Command thought I had learned something useful about fighting humans. They sent my unit to take Busan Station. It was a supply depot in space, very important for moving weapons and food to human colonies. He took a deep breath. His yellow eyes looked tired. The station was not very big. Maybe 200 humans worked there. Captain Sunwoo Kim was in charge of defense. Engineer Hejin Cho ran the technical systems. Intelligence said it would take 2 days to capture the station. How long did it actually take? Minji asked. 8 months. The silence in the room was heavy. Minji wrote the number down and underlined it. We arrived with a full battle fleet, 12 ships and 3,000 soldiers. The station had no weapons that could hurt our ships. It was just a metal box floating in space with some small defense guns. Veltar stood up and walked to the window again. He seemed to do this when the memories became difficult. Captain Kim sent us a message when we arrived. He said, "Welcome to Busan Station. We hope your visit will be educational." We thought he was being sarcastic. What did you do first? We tried to dock our ships to the station. Standard procedure. Send soldiers through the connecting tunnels and take control room by room. Veltar turned back to face her. The tunnels were there. Everything looked normal. But when our first soldiers went inside, the tunnels changed. Changed how? The walls moved. Doors appeared where there had been empty hallway. Passages that led to the center of the station suddenly led to empty space. Our soldiers got lost in corridors that should have been straight lines. He sat down again, his movements slow and careful. Engineer Cho had rebuilt the inside of the station. She could control every wall, every floor, every ceiling. She turned the station into a machine that ate soldiers. We sent in 50 soldiers. 30 came back. They were confused and scared. They said the station was alive. What about the other 20? We found them 3 days later. They were alive but trapped in small rooms with no doors. The walls had closed around them. There was food and water but no way out. On the walls, someone had written messages. What kind of messages? Sorry you're stuck. We'll let you out when this is over. And please don't be afraid. We don't want to hurt you. And your families probably miss you. We miss ours too. Veltar's voice got quieter. My commander was angry. He ordered a bigger attack. 200 soldiers this time. We blasted holes in the station walls and sent them in through many different places. Did it work? No, it made things worse. The humans had prepared for that too. Each group of soldiers found different challenges. Some found rooms full of sleeping gas. Others found floors that would not hold their weight. Some found rooms that were too hot or too cold to stay in. But they weren't killed. That was the strange part. The humans could have killed them easily. Instead, they were captured or forced to retreat. Captain Kim kept sending us messages. Your soldiers are safe. They're just taking a nap. Or don't worry. We're taking good care of your people. Veltar rubbed his forehead with one of his hands. This went on for weeks. We would attack. Our soldiers would disappear into the station. Then we would get a message telling us they were fine. Sometimes the humans would send us pictures of our soldiers eating meals or sleeping in comfortable beds. How did your soldiers react to this? They began to refuse orders. Not because they were afraid of dying, because they were afraid of being treated kindly by the enemy. A soldier can prepare for battle or torture or death. But how do you prepare for enemies who tuck you into bed and leave you cookies? After 2 months, we tried a different approach. We decided to cut off all power to the station, make it cold and dark, force the humans to surrender. What happened? The station kept working. Engineer Cho had hidden power systems all through the structure. When we cut the main power, backup systems came online. When we found those and destroyed them, she started the backup systems for the backup systems. Veltar walked to the table and picked up a glass of water. His hands were still shaking slightly. Then the station started to fight back in ways we never expected. It began to move. Move? Cho had somehow connected the station to old rocket engines hidden in the structure. The station could change its position. Not much, but enough to make our docking attempts fail. She also started using the station's systems as weapons. The lights would flash in patterns that made our soldiers sick. The air systems would blow smoke that smelled terrible but wasn't poison. The artificial gravity would change, making our soldiers fall down or float in the air. How long did this continue? For months. Every week brought new surprises. The station would grow new arms like a metal tree, or parts of it would break off and fly around our ships like metal birds. Veltar sat down and put his hands flat on the table. The worst part was the messages.
Captain Kim and Engineer Cho sent us reports every day.
They told us what they were building, how many supplies they had left, even how they were feeling. What kind of reports? Engineering reports about their modifications to the station, medical reports about our captured soldiers, personal messages about missing their families. They treated us like colleagues working on the same project instead of enemies. One message I remember said, "Dear Hegemony friends, today we finished building a new defense system using coffee makers and exercise equipment. We hope you find it interesting. Also, your soldier Vextar says hi to his family. He's learning to play human card games. They knew your soldiers' names? They learned everyone's name. They asked our captured people about their families, their hobbies, their favorite foods. Then they would mention these things in their messages to us." Veltar's voice became very quiet. After 6 months, I began to feel like Captain Kim knew me better than my own commander did. What finally ended the siege? We decided to board the station with our entire force at once. No more small attacks. Everyone goes in together and takes the control room. It took us 3 days to fight through the station. The humans had built walls and barriers everywhere. But they were not trying to stop us anymore. They were just slowing us down. When we finally reached the control center, we found Captain Kim sitting at his command chair. He was dead. The room was very quiet. Minji stopped writing. Dead how? Old age and exhaustion. The medical report said he had been dead for 3 weeks. But the station had kept fighting. Engineer Cho had programmed all the systems to continue the battle without human control. Where was Engineer Cho? We found her in the engine room, also dead. She had died a month before Captain Kim. But she had built machines to build more machines. The station was defending itself. Veltar looked directly at Minji. The walls of the control room were covered with names. Every person who had worked on the station. Below the names was a message painted in large letters. Earth remembers. Earth does not forget. Earth does not forgive. But there was another message written in smaller letters below that. Take care of our prisoners. They have families too. We found all of our captured soldiers in a special section of the station. They were healthy and well-fed. Many had learned to speak the human language. Some said they wanted to stay and help fix the station. How did this affect your soldiers? Half of them requested transfers to other units. They said they could not fight humans anymore. The other half became very quiet and stopped talking about the war. My commander ordered the station destroyed, but the hegemony leadership said no. They wanted to study how 2 humans had held off our entire battle. Fleet for 8 months, Veltar stood up slowly. I learned something at Busan Station that I did not learn at New Seoul. Humans don't just fight with weapons. They fight with their minds, their creativity, their refusal to accept defeat. They turn every disadvantage into a new kind of advantage. But more than that, he continued, they never stop caring about their enemies as people. Even when they're killing us, they're worried about our feelings. He looked out the window at the stars. That's when I began to understand that we were not fighting a normal war. We were fighting people who could build a fortress out of kindness and use mercy as a weapon. After Busan Station, did your opinion of humans change? Yes, Veltar said. I began to fear them. Dr. Minji Park refilled her glass of water and looked at her notes. Veltar had been talking for 2 hours now, and his stories were becoming darker. You mentioned that you began to fear humans after Busan Station, she said. What happened next? Veltar was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be deciding whether to continue. The Yamato incident, he said finally. Your coalition records call it that, right? A single human warship against an entire hegemony battle group. Yes, I've read the official reports, but they don't contain much detail. The official reports don't tell the real story. Veltar's voice was very quiet now. They can't tell the real story. No one would believe it. He walked to the corner of the room where a small plant grew in a pot. He touched one of the leaves gently. Admiral Bora Shin commanded the UES Yamato. It was a heavy cruiser, built for long missions away from home. Good ship, but nothing special. The ship had 300 crew members. How did you encounter them? The Yamato was cut off behind our lines after a battle near the Kepler system. The ship was damaged and alone. Our long-range sensors found it drifting near a dead planet. Veltar turned back toward the table but did not sit down. My fleet commander decided it would be good practice for new officers. Send them to capture one damaged human ship. Easy victory to build confidence, but it wasn't easy. We sent 12 ships to surround the Yamato. Standard procedure. Demand surrender, then board and capture if they refuse. The Yamato was clearly damaged. Hull breaches, engine problems, weapon systems offline. Admiral Shin responded to our surrender demand. She said, "Thank you for the invitation, but we're going to have to decline. Please stand by for Protocol 7. What was Protocol 7? We didn't know. It wasn't in any of our intelligence files about human military procedures. We thought it might be a self-destruct sequence." Veltar sat down heavily in his chair. We were wrong. Protocol 7 was much worse than self-destruct. He was quiet for so long that Minji began to think he would not continue. Admiral Shin began to take her ship apart. He said finally, "Not destroying it. Rebuilding it. Turning every piece into a weapon." What do you mean? The Yamato launched its escape pods at our ships, but the pods had been modified. They were now guided missiles filled with explosives made from ship supplies. The first wave destroyed 2 of our smaller vessels. Then the ship began launching pieces of itself, sections of hull plating with rocket engines attached, furniture that had been turned into projectiles, even personal belongings from the crew that had been weaponized. Veltar rubbed his temples. Our fleet commander ordered an immediate attack, but every time we got close to the Yamato it would change. Parts would break off and fly toward us. New weapons would appear where there had been empty space before. How long did this go on? For 3 days, the Yamato kept transforming. Dr. Taman Park, the ship's medical officer, had turned the medical bay into a factory. They were making weapons from surgical equipment and medicines. The strangest thing was that Admiral Shin kept talking to us. She would explain what she was doing. We've just launched a batch of surgical lasers modified for anti-ship use. Please take appropriate defensive measures. She was polite and professional, like she was giving a training demonstration. Exactly like that. She would warn us about new attacks and give us advice on how to defend against them. But then she would use different attacks that we couldn't defend against. Veltar stood up and began pacing again. After 2 days, we realized something terrible. The Yamato crew was dying from radiation exposure. Their ship was too damaged to protect them, but they kept working. Admiral Shin sent us medical reports about her crew. How many were sick, how many had died, how much time they had left. She asked us to record messages for their families. Messages. She wanted us to tell their families that they had died well, that they had been professional until the end, that they were sorry they couldn't come home, but they were still fighting you. Yes. As they died, they worked harder. The ship became more dangerous every hour. They were racing against their own deaths to cause us as much damage as possible. Veltar stopped pacing and looked directly at Minji. On the 3rd day, Engineer Dongwon Ko sent us a technical report. He explained how he had connected the ship's life support system to the weapon systems. As crew members died, their life support power was redirected to make the weapons stronger. The ship was feeding on its own crew? Not feeding. Using their sacrifice efficiently. Every death made the ship more dangerous. Ko had turned the Yamato into a machine that got stronger as it died. What was Admiral Shin doing during this? She kept sending us status reports. Crew complement now down to 150. Weapon efficiency up 40%. Hull integrity at 30% but holding. She talked about her dying crew like she was reading maintenance statistics. But then she would send personal messages. Please tell Engineer Ko's wife that he said the sunset looked beautiful through the breach in the hull. Or Dr. Park wants his daughter to know that he was thinking about her science project when he died. Veltar sat down again. His hands were shaking more now. On the fourth day, the Yamato started moving toward our flagship. It was no longer a ship. It was a collection of metal pieces held together by determination and spite. What did your commander do? He ordered all ships to retreat to safe distance and bombard the Yamato with long-range weapons. We had to destroy it before it reached us. But Admiral Shin had planned for that too. As our weapons hit the ship, pieces would break off and continue toward us. She had turned the ship's destruction into one final attack. The largest piece, containing what was left of the bridge, crashed into our flagship. It punched through the hull and came to rest in our main hangar. We thought everyone on the Yamato was dead. We sent teams to secure the wreckage and recover bodies for proper burial. Veltar's voice became very quiet. Admiral Shin was still alive. She was in the command chair, barely breathing, with radiation burns covering her body. But she was still working. Working on what? She had rigged the wreckage to explode. Not immediately. She had set it to detonate in exactly 1 hour. Long enough for our teams to get inside and try to help the injured humans. She was going to kill your rescue teams? No, she gave us the disarming code. She told us exactly how to stop the explosion. But first, she made us listen to her final report. Veltar was quiet for a long moment. She told us the names of every crew member who had died. She told us about their families, their dreams, their fears. She made us understand that each death had been a person, not just a casualty number. Then she gave us a message to send to Earth Command. The UES Yamato completed its mission. All crew performed with distinction. Please inform families that their loved ones served with honor. After that, she gave us the disarming code and died. How did this affect your fleet? My commander ordered an immediate withdrawal from that system. Half our ships were damaged or destroyed by one human vessel that was already dead when the battle started. But the real damage was to morale. Our crews had watched humans turn their own deaths into weapons. They had seen enemies who cared more about honor than survival. Veltar looked out the window again. Admiral Shin and her crew could have surrendered. They could have tried to escape. Instead, they chose to make their deaths count for something. What was the lesson your people learned from the Yamato incident? We learned that humans don't just fight until they die. They fight with their deaths. They turn dying into another kind of weapon. And that made you more afraid of them. Yes, because we realized that every human we killed just made the remaining humans more dangerous. Death doesn't weaken them. It makes them stronger. Veltar turned back to face her. After the Yamato incident, our fleet commanders began refusing to engage single human ships. They said it wasn't worth the risk. The risk of losing? The risk of winning, Veltar said. We learned that sometimes victory costs more than defeat. Is that when the war began to change? Yes, but we didn't understand how much it would change. The Yamato incident was just the beginning. Things got much worse after that. He looked at Minji with his tired yellow eyes. Much worse. Veltar stopped talking and stared at his hands for a very long time. Dr. Minji Park could see that this next part of his story was difficult for him to tell. You said things got worse. After the Yamato incident, she said gently. What happened next? Incheon Colony, Veltar whispered. I wish I could forget Incheon Colony. He stood up and walked to the corner of the room. He stood there with his back to her for several minutes. Maybe we should take a break, Minji said. No. His voice was firm. You need to know about Incheon. You need to understand what your people are capable of. He turned around slowly. His yellow eyes looked haunted. Incheon was a civilian colony, families mostly. People who had left Earth to build new homes on a farming world. When the war reached their system, Hegemony Command ordered an evacuation of all military-age humans. Standard procedure? Yes, remove the fighters, leave the non-combatants. Old people, children, anyone who couldn't be a threat. Then occupy the world peacefully until the war ended. Veltar sat down again. His movements were very slow. The evacuation ships came. Most adults left with them. But many children stayed behind. Why? They said it was their home. They said they would take care of the old people who were too sick to travel. We thought this was normal. Children often don't understand war. How many children? About 300, ages 6 to 17. They were led by a 16-year-old named Woo Jin Han and a 14-year-old named Yuna Lim. Veltar's voice became very quiet. At first, everything seemed normal. The children went to school, played games, helped the elderly. They were polite when they saw our patrol units. They would wave and smile. That sounds peaceful. It was peaceful. For 2 weeks. Then our supply convoys started having problems. What kind of problems? Nothing serious at first. Vehicles would break down. Not from attacks or sabotage. Just mechanical failures. Engines would stop working. Tires would go flat. Electronics would malfunction. Our mechanics could never find the real cause. Everything looked normal, but nothing worked properly. Veltar rubbed his forehead. Then we noticed that these breakdowns always happened near the school or the playground. Our soldiers started joking that human children were bad luck. But it wasn't really luck. No, the children were studying our equipment. Every time they saw our vehicles, they were learning how they worked. Then they would find ways to make small changes that would cause failures later. A 6-year-old child would drop a handful of sand into a fuel tank. A 10-year-old would loosen one bolt on an engine. Nothing that would hurt anyone. Just enough to make our vehicle stop working. Why didn't your soldiers notice? Because the children were so small and innocent. They would run up to our soldiers and ask questions. What does this button do? Or can I touch the big wheel? Our soldiers thought it was cute. They didn't realize the children were gathering intelligence. Not until it was too late. Woo Jin Han had organized the children into teams. Some teams watched our patrol routes. Others studied our equipment. Others learned our daily schedules. Veltar stood up and began pacing. After a month, the problems got worse. Our communications equipment started failing. Not all at once. One radio here, one computer there. Always small failures that looked like accidents. Then our soldiers started getting sick. Not seriously ill. Just stomach problems, headaches, fatigue. Nothing that would kill them, but enough to make them ineffective. The children were poisoning your soldiers. Not exactly poisoning. They were adding things to our food and water, medicines that made us sleepy. Herbs that caused stomach upset. Nothing dangerous, but very inconvenient. Yuna Lim had learned about chemistry from her school classes. She taught the other children how to make mixtures that would make us uncomfortable without causing permanent harm. How did you discover what was happening? We didn't at first. We thought there was a disease spreading through our forces. We brought in medical teams and quarantined our sick soldiers. But the problems kept getting worse. Our patrol vehicles would break down in places where children happened to be playing. Our soldiers would get sick after eating at certain locations where children were seen. Veltar stopped pacing and looked directly at Minji. Finally, one of my officers realized the truth. He said, "Sir, I think the children are fighting us." What was your reaction? I laughed. Everyone laughed. The idea that children could wage war against trained soldiers seemed ridiculous. But when we started watching the children carefully, we saw the truth. They had organized a complete resistance operation. Intelligence gathering, sabotage, psychological warfare, all run by teenagers and carried out by children. What did you do? My commander ordered the arrest of Woo Jin Han and Yuna Lim. We thought that removing the leaders would end the resistance. Veltar sat down heavily. We found Yuna in the school library. She was reading a book about military strategy. When we told her she was under arrest, she asked if she could finish the chapter first. She wasn't afraid. She seemed more annoyed than afraid, like we were interrupting her homework. We brought her to our command post for questioning. She sat in the chair like she was at a school meeting. Very polite, very calm. My commander asked her why the children were fighting us. She looked confused by the question. What did she say? She said, "We're not fighting you. We're protecting our home." There's a difference. When my commander explained that we could have her executed for military resistance, she nodded like he had explained a math problem. Then she said something that I will never forget. Veltar's hands began shaking again. She said, "My parents taught me that some things are worth dying for and freedom is worth killing for. But I'm just a kid, so I can't kill very well yet. I can only make you uncomfortable and hope you decide to leave." How did your commander respond? He tried to scare her. He described what would happen to the other children if she didn't tell them to stop the resistance. Yuna listened very carefully. Then she asked if she could send a message to the other children. What kind of message? She wanted to tell them that if anything happened to her, they should take better care of the old people. She was worried that without her help, the elderly colonists might not get proper medical care. Veltar's voice became very quiet. She was more worried about old people than about herself. What happened next? My commander realized that threatening her was useless. You can't intimidate someone who cares more about others than about her own safety. So he tried a different approach. He offered to let all the children leave the colony safely if they would stop their resistance activities. Yuna thought about this for a long time. Then she asked if the old people could come too. When my commander said no, she shook her head. Then we can't leave. Someone has to take care of them. She was willing to die to protect elderly people? Yes, but more than that. She was willing to kill to protect them. She explained this very calmly, like she was discussing a school project. She said, "If you hurt the old people, we will have to hurt you back. We don't want to, but we will. Children can be very creative when they need to be." Veltar stood up and walked to the window. That night, Yuna escaped from our detention cell. We never found out how. The cell was locked and guarded. The next morning, we found a package outside our command post. Inside was a small explosive device and a note. What did the note say? "This bomb is made from school chemistry supplies and old electronics. It's not very powerful, but it works. We have made 50 more. Please think about leaving our world. We don't want to hurt anyone, but we will protect our families." The note was signed by all 300 children, including the 6-year-olds. They had drawn little pictures next to their names. Veltar's reflection in the window looked very old and tired. That was when my soldiers began to break down mentally. They could handle fighting adult enemies. But how do you fight children who draw pictures on their death threats? What did your commander decide? He ordered increased patrols and security measures. But the soldiers began refusing orders. They said they joined the military to fight warriors, not to threaten children. Some soldiers requested immediate transfer to other units. Others simply refused to leave their barracks. A few had complete mental breakdowns. What was the final incident? Veltar was quiet for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. We captured Yuna again 3 days later. This time, my commander decided to make an example of her. He announced that she would be executed publicly to show the other children what happened to resistance fighters. The execution was scheduled for the next morning in the town square. All the children were ordered to watch. But that night, every child in the colony came to our base, not to attack, not to protest. They just came and sat down outside our walls. They sat there in silence all night long. 300 children from age 6 to 17 waiting. Waiting for what? For us to decide what kind of people we wanted to be. Veltar turned away from the window. At dawn, the children stood up together. They formed a line and began walking toward our base entrance. Still silent, still calm. Were they armed? No weapons at all. But each child carried something. A flower, a drawing, a small toy, gifts. The first child in line was maybe 7 years old. She walked up to our guard and handed him a flower. She said, "This is for you. I hope you have a nice day." Then she walked past Dr. Minji Park, noticed that Veltar was becoming more agitated as he told his stories. His hands shook constantly now, and he had trouble sitting still for long periods. "After Incheon Colony, you requested a transfer," she said. "Where did they send you?" "Deep Space Patrol," Veltar replied. "Far from human colonies. The commanders thought it would be safer for soldiers who were having psychological problems with ground combat." "But it wasn't safer?" "No, it was worse. Much worse." He stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the stars looked cold and distant. In deep space, we encountered the ghost ships. Ghost ships? Human vessels that continued fighting long after their crews were dead. Veltar's reflection in the window looked haunted. The first one we found was the UES Gwangju. It had been drifting in space for over a year. Long-range scans showed massive hull damage and no life signs aboard. "So you investigated?" "Standard salvage procedure. Board the derelict vessel, check for survivors, secure any useful intelligence or equipment." My unit docked with the Gwangju and entered through an airlock that was still functioning. The ship's interior lights were working and we could hear the hum of machinery. Even though there were no life signs? That's what made it strange. The ship was clearly operational, but our sensors showed no living beings aboard. We split into teams to search the ship. I led one team toward the bridge. The corridors looked normal, but something felt wrong. Wrong how? The ship was too clean, too organized, like someone was still taking care of it. But the air had a strange smell. What kind of smell? Death. But also something else. Chemicals, preservatives. Veltar turned away from the window and sat down heavily. We found the first body in the engineering section. Captain Jisoo Nam was sitting at her command station, perfectly preserved but clearly dead. She looked like she was just sleeping. How had she been preserved? That was the disturbing part. Someone had used the ship's medical systems to prevent decomposition, not just for Captain Nam but for the entire crew. We found them throughout the ship, all at their duty stations. All perfectly preserved, all dead for months, but the ship was still functioning, more than functioning. It was actively maintaining itself, repairing damage, monitoring systems, even conducting routine maintenance. How was that possible? Engineer Dongwon Ko had spent his final weeks programming the ship's computer systems to use the crew's bodies as components. Components? The neural implants that all human space crew members have were still active after death. Ko had connected these implants to the ship's control systems. So the dead crew was still operating the ship? In a way, yes. Their brains were no longer conscious, but their knowledge and reflexes had been downloaded into the ship's computer. The ship was being run by the memories and skills of dead people. Veltar's voice became very quiet. We found Ko's final log entries. He described the process of connecting each crew member's implants to the ship as they died. He called it ensuring continuity of mission. What was their mission? Harassment of hegemony supply lines. They were supposed to attack our cargo ships and retreat. Simple hit-and-run operations. But they kept doing this after they died. For over a year, the ghost ship had destroyed 17 of our cargo vessels. It would appear, attack, and disappear. We thought it was being controlled by a brilliant tactical commander. But it was being controlled by dead people, by the combat experience and tactical knowledge of dead people, filtered through the ship's computer systems. The ship fought like Captain Nam would have fought, but without human limitations like fear or fatigue. What did you do when you discovered this? My team leader ordered us to shut down the ship's computer systems. But when we tried, the ship began to fight back. Fight back how? Doors would close to trap us in sections. Environmental systems would change the air pressure or temperature. Gravity would shift without warning. The ship was defending itself? More than that. It was trying to capture us alive. We realized that Ko had programmed it to add new crew members by force if necessary. Add new crew members? The ship wanted to kill us and connect our implants to its control systems. It wanted to add our knowledge and skills to its collection of dead crew. Veltar stood up and began pacing. Around the small room, we had to fight. Our way through corridors that changed configuration as we moved. The ship knew our weapons and tactics because it had the memories of human soldiers who had fought against us. Did you escape? Eventually. But we lost 3 soldiers. The ship captured them and began the process of adding them to its crew. Adding them how? We found them connected to medical equipment in the sick bay. Still alive, but with neural implants attached to the ship's computer. Their minds were being slowly downloaded while their bodies were kept functioning. They were conscious during this process? Yes, they could still talk. They told us that the ship was learning everything they knew about hegemony tactics and technology. What did they want you to do? They begged us to kill them before the download was complete. They said they could feel their thoughts becoming part of the ship's mind. Veltar stopped pacing and looked directly at Minji. That was the most difficult decision I ever made as a soldier. You killed your own people? We ended their suffering before they became part of the ghost ship. It was the only mercy we could give them. How did this affect your unit? Half of my soldiers refused to board derelict ships after that. The other half became obsessed with destroying every human vessel we encountered, even if it might contain valuable intelligence. But the ghost ships didn't stop with the Gwangju. No, we found dozens of them. Each one had been modified differently, but they all had the same basic principle. Dead crews running the ship through neural implant connections. Some had been dead for years but were still carrying out their original orders. Others had evolved their missions, becoming more aggressive and creative over time. Evolved? The ship computers would analyze the results of each battle and modify their tactics. They were learning and improving, guided by the accumulated experience of dead crews. We found ships that had rebuilt themselves using debris from their own battles, ships that had grown new weapons by cannibalizing other systems, ships that had developed entirely new forms of attack that no living human had ever thought of. What was the most disturbing ghost ship you encountered? The UES Mokpo. We found it in orbit around a dead planet. It had been there for 3 years, but it was still fully operational. The crew had all died from a plague that had spread through the ship, but before they died, they had programmed the ship to continue their research mission. What kind of research? They were studying biological weapons, trying to develop diseases that would affect our species but not harm humans. The ghost ship had spent 3 years experimenting with different biological agents, using the bodies of its own dead crew as test subjects. It had created dozens of new diseases and was preparing to deploy them against hegemony colonies. How did you stop it? We couldn't board the ship without being exposed to the biological weapons, so we had to destroy it from a distance. But before we did, the ship sent us a transmission. Captain Hyunwoo Park had recorded a message before he died. What did he say? He apologized for what the ship had become. He said they had never intended to create something so terrible. But he also said that if we were listening to his message, it meant the ship had succeeded in its mission. What mission? To make us afraid. To make us understand that fighting humans meant dealing with enemies who would continue fighting even after death. Veltar sat down and put his head in his hands. That was when I realized the true horror of human warfare. They had turned death itself into a weapon. Every human ship that was destroyed might become a ghost ship, continuing to fight with the accumulated knowledge and experience of its dead crew. How many ghost ships did your forces encounter? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Every time we thought we had found them all, more would appear. They were like a disease spreading through space, infecting every battle zone with undead warships. Our supply lines became impossible to maintain. Cargo ships would disappear only to be found weeks later, converted into ghost ships and attacking our own forces. The psychological effect on our crews was devastating. Soldiers began refusing to fight near areas where human ships had been destroyed. They were afraid that every piece of floating debris might be part of a ghost ship. Some of our ships began encountering their own dead crew members. Soldiers who had been captured by ghost ships and converted would appear on screens, warning us about attacks or trying to convince us to surrender. They would remember our names, our families, our fears, but they were no longer on our side. How did the war change because of the ghost ships? Fleet commanders began ordering the complete destruction of any human vessel, even if it might contain useful intelligence. Nothing could be left intact that might become a ghost ship. But this strategy failed too. The ghost ships learned to hide among normal space debris. They would disguise themselves as destroyed vessels, then activate when our ships came close. Some ghost ships began working together, sharing information and